Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Gordon Simpson about DHL's talent investment last year, as well as the changes he foresees in the logistics human resource strategy for 2021 and 2022. Gordon Simpson, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan.
It's great to have you. I'm excited to have this conversation and really dig into the example and kind of the live case study of what DHL has been doing over this past year to retain talent in the logistics industry amidst this pandemic. As COVID-19 continues to change and shape industries globally, HR teams have had to adapt and create strategies to retain and stimulate employees who are now working from home. And obviously this shift has particularly affected your sector, the logistics sector, which prior to the pandemic relied on in-person operations to carry out, everything that they do day to day. And so this will be the topic of conversation for today. I really look forward to hearing more about what DHL has been up to and what you've been doing in this HR space. Before we launch into the dialogue, I wanted to share Gordon's bio with everybody. Gordon Simpson is the Senior Vice President and Head of Human Resources for the DHL Global Forwarding's Americas region based out of Miami, Florida. He is also the Global Employee Relations Lead for DGF. In 2006, Gordon began working at DHL as Senior Vice President of HR for the Asia Pacific region. He led the integration of 21 Asian Pacific countries following Deutsche Post acquisition of Excel, as well as number of subsequent reorganization efforts. He was instrumental in developing and implementing a regional HR strategy to align with division and global strategies. He relocated to the US to assume his current role at the start of 2012. Prior to joining DHL, he worked in HR for various companies around the world in oil, chemical, and shipping industries, and has lived in South Africa, Thailand, Singapore, and the US. A man after my own heart, international man of mystery, and I love all of the global experience and travel that you've been engaged with and what you continue to do globally, on a global scale in the HR space. Thank you for joining me and welcome to the podcast. Anything else you would like to share by way of background or personal context with us before we launch into the conversation?
No, I thank you for that glowing introduction, and more than happy to just kick off and get straight into it.
Excellent. Well, let's start with a little bit of the context at DHL. I suspect people listening probably understand what the company is and what you do, but maybe just a really quick crash course into DHL, what you do, the logistics side of things, and then we can start to get into more of the HR elements, particularly during the pandemic and moving to more virtual work.
Okay. So DHL is part of the Deutsche Post DHL group. There are a number of operating divisions, Post and Parcel, which is essentially the German postal service. We have the Express division, which is really the primary competitor of the likes of FedEx and UPS. We have our supply chain division, which is largely domestic warehousing and transportation. We have the global forwarding business, which is the part of the business that I'm involved in. That's the freight business. It involves movement of product by road, rail, sea, or air. And then we have our e-commerce division, which, under the pandemic circumstances has certainly come to the fore with what has been happening over the past year. So that in a nutshell is DHL. It's a massive organization. We are the most international company in the world, seemingly. We operate in over 220 countries. We have over 570,000 employees. Here in the Americas region, in aggregate, we're probably over 120,000 people. Our division is by far the smallest. We have about 8,000 people across this region. And operate in most of the countries across this particular region. Now, when the pandemic started, we were in the very fortunate position in transportation and logistics that we were deemed an essential service, and as a consequence of that, we continued to operate, over this past year. Clearly, people that worked in those customer-facing roles, whether those were couriers in our express division, or people working in our warehouses where we were needing to move freight and so on, those people continued in those roles from the get-go. What we did, though, was that when the pandemic really hit here in the US, what we started to do was get people to work from home, and the vast majority of the people that could work from home started doing that very soon after the middle of March. And what really amazed me was that from a technology point of view, and from just the ability of the company and the organization to continue to run the business effectively, it was quite remarkable how smooth that transition was with hindsight. Now, that's not denying that there were a number of issues that we had to address. Obviously, we needed to get protocols put in place very, very quickly. Now that a year has passed, it's hard to believe that was the case. But paramount for us was the health and safety of our employees. So all of those conditions regarding keeping people safe at work were really tackled head on right from the get-go. And I think that was evidenced when we look at the overall number of people that were infected and subsequently recovered. But I think from an HR point of view, more critical than that was that working from home and managing people in a virtual environment was something pretty new to many people. And obviously, one of the key things there was understanding the implications of that. So if you think about what happened to people that had school-going children, where they were suddenly being required to educate their children on a virtual basis, or you had people that had maybe were single parents and had the issues of taking care of their kids at home and trying to manage their job and their life. It was extremely difficult, and one of the things that we wanted to be sure that we were doing was staying connected with people on a regular basis, so that the things that we would normally do, in a work environment where people were actually coming into the office, we continued to do many of those things, but we did them in a virtual way. And I think that helped enormously, just keeping people connected to the organization, reinforcing the notion that what they were doing was critically important, certainly in terms of keeping the world moving. And if you look at DHL or DPDHL's purpose, which very simply stated is connecting people, improving lives, I think that was extremely important during this whole period. And what certainly struck me is that as a kind of purpose-driven organization, that was the first time, I think, that on a global scale, that this really is something that employees across the world could buy into and really understand what it was that we were doing, whether that was moving PPE from China into the US or elsewhere in the world at the start of the pandemic, or whether it was getting shipments of critical stuff to people around the world during the pandemic, and then finally this issue of distribution of the vaccines. I think it's been really important because people suddenly start appreciating the value that the organization brings, and really in terms of that purpose of improving lives and helping people on a global basis with the work that we do on a day-to-day basis was critically important.
Yeah, well, thank you for that background and kind of the crash course introduction to the DHL logistics environment as you move into a virtual world during the pandemic. And one of the things you said there towards the end, the purpose-driven component to the organization, I think is very powerful. You also mentioned earlier on about the priority that DHL leadership put on the health and safety of their people. Now, maybe everyone listening, is thinking, well, duh, of course, you need to look out for the health and safety of your people. But that's easier said than done. And there are so many challenges around doing that, not just the physical health, but the mental health and the stress and anxiety issues, everything surrounding this moment. And to your point of, parents working from home, I have 6 children working from home, my wife working from home, trying to school my 6 children from home. Man, that's hard work. And so this environment that we all found ourselves in was new. Nobody expected it. Yet I applaud you and your team and everyone at DHL for this to be able to be such a smooth transition. I think everyone was forced into this, right? You had to flip the switch and kind of move virtual almost overnight. And there's so many growing pains around that. But some organizations did it much better than others. And it sounds like the purpose-driven nature of your organization and the employee-centric values of your organization helped you perhaps to manage, the shift and the change a little bit better than some organizations who really struggled with it. And I'm also struck by the essential worker element that you were discussing and the role of companies like yours in the distribution of the PPE and the vaccine and such. I think those sorts of elements aren't a minor thing in the minds of the line employees who show up, put their health at risk. They know the importance of what they're doing and how it's going to make a difference. And whether we're talking about DHL employees or we're talking about any other organization, anyone listening to this podcast today, your own organization, you need to be thinking about how do you connect your people to that grander purpose, that sense of meaning and purpose that will help them weather these types of challenges and stressful and anxiety-ridden times. Well, let's talk a little bit more specifically then about the logistics side of DHL and looking at the HR component in relation to those logistics and attracting, retaining, and engaging and motivating your people during this really rough year amidst all these constraints. What were some of the things that you and your team at DHL did to try to tackle that?
I think there were a couple of things, and the 3 kind of big buckets that maybe worth talking a little bit about. I mean, one is around the retention issue. So retention in the sense that under normal circumstances where people would attend training programs and the like, one of the things that we found very soon after the middle of March of 2020 was that we couldn't just stop many of those activities in their tracks. So we so much of the training and development activities that we would normally do face to face, we had to figure out ways to be able to do that virtually. At that stage, I can still recall, I had some misgivings about that initially, and those fears were certainly allayed very quickly when we started doing it. And some of the programs that I participated in, I realized that that transition from face to face to virtual learning was a lot easier than I'd anticipated. And if it's done in a way where you're not sitting on the phone for 8 hours, you can break it down into more bite-sized chunks. It made a huge difference, and I think that transition for me was quite significant, right? And I was really impressed with the way we were able to do that almost seamlessly. So that was the one area. The other one, and something that obviously I think was probably centered in the US, but obviously a global phenomenon. We talk about trying to create an inclusive workforce, and as you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that went on around diversity, equity, and inclusion, last year was a real wake up call, and oftentimes, in situations where you're able to sit down and have face-to-face discussions with people on some of those kind of topics, it tends to be a lot easier. So we had those issues to deal with. I think we dealt with it extremely well from the point of view of being able to get those topics on the agenda and really drive some of the discussion around, particularly the diversity and inclusion thing. And we do have a lot of specific KPIs that we measure, particularly in terms of whether it's race or gender or ability or disability. Many of those topics that we talk about on a regular basis to ensure that we're staying connected.
I'm excited to announce the publication of my new book from HCI Press, The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership: Ordinary, Everyday Actions That Produce Extraordinary Results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life.
The other one is around, maintaining and engaging people, and our Express division, for example, is in Great Place to Work is ranked number 2 globally. That varies from place to place around the world, but likewise in our organization where we are part of the top employer organization, we have that top employer status across our region and in most of the countries that we operate in. So, we've put a lot of time and effort into maintaining those actions and activities that we would normally do if people were going into the office on a regular basis. So we've been able to maintain all of that, just doing it in a virtual way and being sensitive to the fact that, we do have to manage slightly differently. When it comes to that engagement piece, our philosophically as an organization, we really take the view that, engaged employees result in engaged customers and obviously, drive the bottom line. So when you think about, connecting the dots for people in our business where we've, for the past probably 10, 12 years been talking about the 3 bottom lines that we have about being an employer of choice, an investment of choice, and a provider of choice. We've been able to translate that pretty well during this pandemic period, and I think it's for us, it certainly worked particularly well. One of the big topics that is starting to emerge, I think, as part of this, is around sustainability. And when you look at the 3 key pillars of, the environment, the social, and the governance parts of that, I think it's become even more prevalent, over the past year while we've been in this kind of lockdown mode. So that is going to be a key area going forward, and I think it's going to help us enormously in being able to connect the dots even further. And when I think about it, when we first put the protocols in place back in March last year, the notion that, by June, everybody would be back in the office. Well, we're now in March 2021, and we certainly, have had to change that thinking on many occasions. But the reality is that for us, it's worked pretty well.
Yeah, well, that's great. I appreciate you outlining those three broad areas. And you're right, this has gone on longer than I think most people had thought, or certainly had hoped. And it was pretty stark this past week when we hit the 1 year mark of all of the World Health Organization announcement of the pandemic and the lockdowns and everything around that. And it's a little bit surreal to look back on this past year and to think about what has happened. And you mentioned also the Black Lives Matter. We have the political unrest, around in an election year in the U.S. and the aftermath. There were just so many things that made it a really, really tough year. And so I applaud your efforts towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. I applaud your efforts towards employee engagement and really focusing on the mental and physical health of your people. I think that's really important. It's a good lesson for everyone listening. What can we do? Of course, the bottom line issues are important, but it's not just profit, as you mentioned. There are other elements that are key, and if we start to forget those other elements, and particularly how they relate to our people, then we're going to erode at the trust within our organization. We're going to erode, the capital that we've built up with our people to be able to accomplish really great things, and ultimately the sustainability of the organization is going to suffer. And I think that's happened with a lot of organizations. Admittedly, put in a really tough situation that no one was really ready for. But some organizations just simply weren't up to the challenge of dealing, with the complexities of that moment. And because of it, they lost some really good people, or perhaps have even had to close their doors. So these are the ongoing challenges that we face, as the pandemic continues. And now, everyone's saying hopefully by June of 2021, we'll be out of the woods and things will get back to normal a little bit more. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But certainly we've learned a lot of lessons, I think, this past year. If you had to, go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right. I was just going to say, and while all of this was going on, there were certain countries that, had natural disasters to cope with, right? And you might remember that in Honduras, they were hit with 2 hurricanes within 2 weeks. We had a number of employees who we had to move from their homes to higher areas and so on. And I can still, recall, being sure that the employees were safe in a very different set of circumstances. They were dealing with COVID and social distancing and what have you, and suddenly this befell them. But the response from the organization was quite unbelievable. We, for example, in the US, at many of our locations, we said to people, if you have clothing or foodstuffs or whatever that you could potentially contribute, that we could move to our colleagues in Honduras, that would be tremendously appreciated. We were staggered with the kind of response that took place. We also set up a GoFundMe page for people to contribute to their colleagues. We have a global program called We Help Each Other, so that where these things happen, from a global corporate perspective, we provide assistance. So it was just incredible to see the response of the organization to some of those things, even under the very difficult circumstances that people were already finding themselves in. And that to me was tremendous. And I think you used a word earlier, trust. And that trust thing is there's a high level of reciprocity on that, whether it's with your employees or whether it's with your customers or anybody else, where you do what you say you're going to do. It's critically important, and I think we've had many opportunities as an organization to reinforce that over the past year.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. With all the positive things that have happened amidst the challenges and the hardships, what are maybe 1 or 2 things that were really difficult that you hadn't anticipated, that you feel like ultimately perhaps you were able to come out better on the other side, but were really challenges in dealing with, this virtual environment while trying to carry out something as physical and tangible as logistics?
Yeah, if I think about it, I think the challenges, obviously from a business point of view, there were a number of challenges because, in the immediately following the implementation, and you think about what happened, for example, to air travel. Now, thinking that for every aircraft that flies with people, above the wing and the belly of that aircraft is probably freight that is moving as well. And so the impact of that and the closure of many plants and stuff that occurred across the globe meant that our volumes were severely impacted. But there were places, for example, with our chartering business, where people had to move stuff around the world, under conditions that were very tough at the start of the pandemic. So there were responses that we had to look for solutions, and we were able to find them. But it is going to take some time, I think, for the world to recover. Certainly, when you look at some of the capacity constraints that we were dealing with as a logistics company, were very tough, right? But we were able to find ways to overcome that, and I think we did really well with that. I suppose one of the really positive things for us is that we didn't need, to a very, very large extent, to lay people off because of of a complete decline in business or a reduction in business. There were occasions when some people had to be furloughed and so on, but it was not for extended periods, and I think we were able to get through that pretty well. But certainly in terms of challenges, I think one of the biggest things for me was keeping people's spirits up, and when you think about the social aspects, where people for months on end had very little face-to-face contact with people, that was really difficult to deal with. And I think what we started was bi-weekly calls that we were having, not only at a departmental level and so on, but also in our regional headquarters, for example, where 95% plus of the people were working from home. How do you keep people informed? How do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them connected, and so on? And it was amazing to me. I mean, I was enormously surprised and very pleased to see that the vast majority of people called into those Skype calls that we would arrange and actively participate. So it worked pretty well. But other challenges, I think, in the earlier days when we were first doing the implementation and dealing with the anxiety of people that were being required to come to the office, things like what happens if the person who's sitting 6 feet away from me has COVID? What do I do and how do I deal with that? I think the key there was to get on top of those things very quickly, to be sure that everybody was complying with the protocols that we'd established. And I think it worked pretty well. So overall, when I look back, and it's oftentimes much easier with hindsight to say, oh, it wasn't that bad. But there certainly were times when, I think we were somewhat challenged in terms of, what are we going to do now? But we were always able to come up with the solutions to that, which was great.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Gordon, it has been a real pleasure talking with you and learning a little bit more about DHL and your approach, how you've responded to this pandemic moment to focus on the needs of your people and still allow for the organization to really find success amidst the challenging circumstances. And to your point earlier, really, it's with the people that we were able to do that. Without focusing on our people, ultimately, we're not going to be able to provide the products and services that are of value to the community and to our customers, and we're not going to have good customer interactions. And so the bottom line is, we can't shortcut and shortchange our people during difficult times. And sometimes that's what organizations do when they're trying to tighten the belt and trying to deal with cut budget, to tight, difficult budget situations. But the long-term implications of shortcutting your people, I think, is something that should really give us pause. And it's been a real pleasure to hear about everything that DHL has done to try to tackle that. Before we close today, I did want to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, find out more about what you're up to, and then just give us the last word on the topic for today.
Great. So my email address is gordon.simpson@dhl.com. And I think as far as last words are concerned, we're certainly hoping that, in the coming months, as more and more people around the globe get vaccinated, that we will get to a situation where people are going back to the office. I don't believe that we'll ever get back to where we were. I think there are a number of key things that we've learned over this time frame. And I think that many of those learnings we will be able to carry on into the future, right? So things like, travel, things like, the need for everybody to be working in the office. Some of those things I think have changed fundamentally, and I doubt we'll ever see the kind of world of work that we saw pre-COVID. So looking forward to the challenges that lie ahead, but I think that in the coming months we certainly will see a bit of relaxing of the limitations and some of the regulations that exist, and get back to a sense of normalcy where we can continue to benefit organizationally and individually. So really appreciate the time, and thank you so much indeed, Jonathan, for the opportunity, and take care, stay safe, and we'll talk again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gordon. It has been a real pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. We are excited about the launch of HCI's new magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine designed to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We will be publishing issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Check out the first issue and let us know what you think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe, and that you have a great week.